Okay, so I'm going to attempt a screen share. And I want to share the whole screen. All right, hopefully you can see my screen, including my music selection, which is not at all embarrassing. And all right, you should see my slides. I was hoping for a yes from someone, but okay, yes. Here we go. All right, so the title of the talk is Evolving the Optimal Transmission Network. That's a bold title for what is really a proof of concept of this idea of, is it possible to use a genetic algorithm to evolve optimal transmission networks? So this is a project that started probably over a year ago with Patrick also in attendance and myself, and at that time a few other people. It's taken a long time to get through it, mostly finding the time to do it, but we have recently got some initial results, so I'm going to share them with you in the hopes to get some insightful feedback. Okay, so background is epidemiological models on networks. There's a ton of them covering a huge range of variations in the models. I'm going to work under the assumption that most of the people in attendance of this conference are already familiar with the body of work, the large body of work that I'm talking about, although not all of it. Okay, so among these variations are models, and they look at the difference, the effects of network structure on whether disease or idea or some other things, propagation through the network. Okay, so typically the models compare like one or a few well-known network structures or generation algorithms across a range of parameters. So this is the small world network, but you change the rewiring probability and you see how that affects the propagation. Or you've got modular community structure and you change the percentage of internal versus external links and see how that changes the communication of ideas. So there's, again, tons of variations of these in broad strokes. Keep that stuff in mind. And the way this usually works is they have measures of the spread of the disease or idea, et cetera. And they compare that to measures of the network, the betweenness and the centrality and the modularity. And they compare those two things. So find basically the regression, the relationship between the measures on the network and the measures of the disease spread. Okay, so they want to find out which network features facilitate the spread or dampen the spread. Okay, so I mean, that's all great stuff, and we all love it. But our question is, given a model of agent dynamics across the network, what are the optimal network structures with respect to desiderata for that model's outcome? Okay, it's extremely vague by design. Okay, so that's our broad stroke. This is the kind of question we want to answer, but that's hopeless. So given a network propagation model, what network structure optimizes the propagation? All right, so that's something we can handle, right? We want to know some propagation model and not just the effect of some parameter on the effect, but what's the actual best network to spread on that. Okay, and we approach that here by, given a simple SI propagation model, if we evolve the networks towards reaching stasis as quickly as possible, what network structures do the networks form? Okay, so that's our sort of concrete project that we're doing here, our proof of concept. But this was not our first model that we tried. So really, you could think of it as, if we use a genetic algorithm on networks running an SI model, do we find anything interesting at all? Right? Does it even work as we expect it would work? If we get that, at least, we'd be pretty happy. We get more than that, so we're very happy. Okay, so our propagation model is, say, very simple by design. At setup of the model, one agent is chosen uniformly at random to be infectious. Then, at each tick, each infectious agent has an independent 50% chance to infect each susceptible neighbor. Standard, simple SI model. The model runs until either all of the agents are infected, it's an SI model, so there's nothing to do after that, or not everyone's infected, but no agent changes state for either 5 or 25 ticks. This is called the static timeout parameter. Okay, so this is important. Model is probabilistic, so just because in one tick someone doesn't change state, well, it could just because they didn't roll the dice properly. So you got to let some time go. And how much time do you go before you stop the simulation? Okay, now Our genetic algorithm is a little bit more complicated, but still a simple genetic algorithm. There are 50 agents in each network. That's constant. There's no birth or death. The agents are initially connected in a random, directed, unweighted, non-reflexive network with 100 edges. So it's a mean degree of 2, but so there's 50 agents, so the 100 edges are added at random. There are no self edges, okay? Directed network, no weights. Got it? Okay, now there's 50 of these networks. Okay, so I generate 50 random networks that have 50 agents each and 100 edges each, okay? The adjacency matrix of each of those 50 networks are captured as lists. So it's a 50 by 50 adjacency matrix, so it's a list of 2,500 ones and zeros. So it's the adjacency matrix sort of spread out across a list, unrolled, as you will. And that's the genome for our genetic algorithm. Okay, so it's a standard GA genome. It's a list of bits. Okay, then our genetic algorithm runs, so at each generation, for each network, I run 5 trials. And each trial is the one initially infected agent. Okay, and so it runs until those halting conditions are met. And then the fitness of that network is 1 divided by the mean of those 5 trials, the length of the trial. How many turns did it take to reach stasis? Okay, so it's 1 divided by that. So shorter runs means higher fitness. Okay, so then the selection step. So the 25 networks with the highest fitness, right, which means the shortest runs, are kept as is, and they are replicated. Okay, now there's 2 rules that we do for selection process. One of them is mutation. If mutation is active, then 13 potential edges, 15 positions of the 2,450, because it's non-reflexive, right? So of those edges are bit flipped, okay? 13 edges is roughly 0.5% of the network. So it's a fairly small mutation rate. And if transcription is active, then a random segment from one of the kept networks is spliced into the copy of that other kept network. Okay, so you're keeping the good bits and sharing them. All right, so that's the setup of our model. That's the whole setup. So we do experiments. We do experiments in NetLogo, currently using version 5.3.1, because I had some helper functions that wouldn't automatically translate into the newer version. We have 3 parameters that we sweep: transcription on or off, mutation rate off, or that 0.5%, and a static timeout of 5 or 25, the halting condition. Okay, so we run all 8 of those combinations 10 times for 100 generations to get the data I'm about to show you. Okay, so results, the base case. The base case is when mutation and transcription are both turned off. In this case, the only variations among the initial population can be selected for. So we know this is not going to be too exciting because, right, only 50 networks exist in the beginning and they're all very sparse. So you can cut and paste a little bit, but you're only going to be able to add so many edges and change so many things. So if you look at the top, the yellow plots is the number of turns that it takes. And the reason it's up and down a lot is because it's a different initial 5 agents are chosen at each generation. So each generation is the mean of 5 generations, and those mean of 5 trials, and those 5 trials have a different initial agent. So given the network structure, it can take a long time to reach them, or it can be very short. The initial agent can be totally disconnected, right? And then it's very fast. Okay, and then the red plots are the mean percent infected. Okay, and the mean percent infected, again, it goes down initially. I'm gonna explain that later. But the idea is that it settles after about 15 generations. It's basically done, and then it's just noise from the trial randomness. Okay, now it is interesting that the number of turns it takes goes down a little bit. In the case on the right, you can see. So that's already a pretty nice indicator, but it gets better. Okay, nice thing about genetic algorithms is that they can surprise you. And there are 2 solution strategies for evolving the optimal network in terms of speed. Okay, recall and consider our conditions, right? Our fitness function selects for shorter trials, shorter numbers of turns per trial. Okay, and trials end when everyone is infected or the static timeout limit is reached. So there's two ways you can stop. So one thing that can happen is you see on the left, when the mutation rate is off and transcription is true and the low static timeout, what you see is the number of edges is decreasing, right? And the mean percent infected is decreasing. Why is that? Well, it's happening because they're not infecting everybody. So they're gonna suffer that initial static timeout. And they want to do that as fast as possible. And the way to do that is remove all the edges so that any initial agent is disconnected from the whole network. So it'll have to suffer the penalty, but it's going to no extra turns from there. So it's going to stop in 5 turns. That's the idea. Okay. On the right, where there is a mutation rate, you see that they do find the case where everyone gets infected. Right? That's the red chart, bottom right. Everyone gets infected, and then the green plot is telling you that the number of edges is constantly increasing. So if you do find a solution where everyone's infected, that's fast, and it's faster the more edges you have, right? Obviously. So you get 2 solution strategies, and they both reduce time. So on the left is the remove edges, and on the right is infect everybody faster. And you can see that the right one is better at slowing things down because you don't suffer that static timeout, which wasn't intended to be a penalty at not infecting everybody, but it turns out it has that effect. So that's a happy surprise. Okay. Another thing is that static timeout value actually works as a selection pressure. So on the left, we see the case and the static timeout is 5, and on the right, the static timeout is 25. So in this case, of the 10 runs that we did, one of those runs manages through transcription to find a case where everyone gets infected. And when everyone gets infected and the static timeout is 5, it may not be enough to make their fitness better than the other ones, right? Because the model's already taking, say, 7 or 10 ticks to finish. So that static timeout of 5 maybe doesn't make a big difference. But when the static timeout is 25, then finding everyone saves you that 25 tick penalty at the end. So once you find it, one finds it, then you've got 1, it's deprecated. Now you've got 2. Those are the best 2. Then you've got 4, you've got 8. And look, there's only 50 networks in the population. So very quickly you converge on that network and variations of that network dominating the population. Okay, so the age-old question, mutation versus transcription. All right, I don't have whatever was that. There's an idiom for this in English, but I've not been in America for a very long time, so I forget the idiom. But I don't have a card in this deck, or I don't have a hand in this game, or something like that. I don't care which one you think is better, but at least with our current parameters, mutation is almost always necessary, right? Because with that, it always finds the case of infecting everybody and getting the fast solution. In the case of without mutation using transcription, it almost never finds it with these parameters. Now I say that, but if I make the initial mean degree not 2, but 3, then it does usually find it, even with transcription. Right? So the initial network is already connected enough that transcription on that does do it. Now, I don't have those runs to show you, but I did a lot of runs in searching for something interesting to show you. So this is a case. And also this case is nice. It demonstrates that even though mutation seems necessary, transcription does have an effect, right? The dynamics are different in the generations. It's spread out more. There's more going back and forth. So we may need mutation, but we're not going to write off transcription just yet. Okay, so final result is that optimal network evolution happens. Not that we evolved the optimal network in this case, but selection towards shorter runs does generate networks that find ways to shorten the runs. It finds 2 ways to shorten the runs, which is really cool, right? And this is using the genetic algorithm on the network structure itself. So this is not parameters of the model. This is genetic algorithm on the network itself. So in the case of a simple SI model, it's pretty clear what the optimal networks would be, right? An empty network and a complete network. Okay, so we would need a lot more generations to get to those points. It's not even clear the selection pressure we have now would eventually get to those points, because we're only doing 5 trials instead of the full 50 trials. And even then there's randomness in the 50% of infection. So you may not actually get the fully complete network, which is the limit case. And we could try things like, what if we do all 50 agents as the initial agents? And what if we do make the probability of infection 1? Then maybe we do get the complete network. And well, I can try that out tomorrow. All right, so conclusions. The proof of concept works, basically. And with a simple SI model, we get it, the result that we were looking for, the kind of result we're looking for. Like all GAs, we got to make the fitness function. We got to be very careful so that the networks actually evolve to what we want. We already found this nice surprise, but it was a surprise. And if we're going to do this for other systems, we've got to be very careful about how we make the fitness function work. And like I said, mutation is almost certainly necessary for mixing, at least in the case of small populations of networks of only 50. And if we want interesting networks to evolve, which we do, then we need more interesting agent dynamics than simple SI models. So clearly more work is needed in various aspects of this. First thing is NetLogo crashes horribly, the Java heap space error and other such things. If I do too many generations or too many combinations or too many repetitions, no matter what I do, it crashes. So I'm going to rewrite the model in another language. I'm leaning towards Python because if I do pursue these like SI type models, like simple network models, then I don't need really agent power, right? I can just do it with like matrix operations. And then I could leverage like parallel processing of like a deep learning type of framework to run them on GPUs on weekend supercomputers. So that would be nice. Other thing is sweeping the parameters of models is, as you already know, we just heard, that's combinatorically explosive. There's just so many things a model can do. If we add on top of that all the things that a GA can do, then it's really just too much to do. So what we'd like to do is come up with some reasonable standards for the GA parameters. So we only have to do a small handful of these things. And that might be a pipe dream, because while I was thinking about that, I already discovered a new idea, which is in some cases, you're going to start with a sparse network and grow it up. In some cases, you're going to start with a dense network and prune it down. In some cases, you're going to start in between and see where it goes. So there's already, to evolve sort of robustly across what the agent dynamics are, you're going to need pretty heavy GA model on top of that, or underneath that, as the case, it might be more accurate. So so that's something to consider going forward. And in the beginning, though, well, we'll take it on a case-by-case basis about how to run the GA on the particular model we're looking at. Also, a deeper dive into previous attempts. We looked for other people who are doing GAs on networks, and there's a ton of them who are doing GNAs on networks, or GAs on parameters for things across networks. These exist in no shortage, but applying the GA to the network structure directly, or the structure as the genome, we did not find any examples of that, but maybe it exists, and some of you might know that, and we'd love to hear and read and see those things. So extensions. Now, obviously, this is not the end. We've already got these 3 planned and a few more. Zollman model of transient diversity is very popular among philosophers. So he and his followers find an advantage for social structures to form communities that can protect ideas that initially aren't so good, but later pan out to be better. And if you've got this fully connected network, the idea spreads really fast. But if you've got like a diversity of ideas, you might kill an idea that you want to keep. It's useful later on. So the idea is, if we have this model of transient diversity, can we start with various different kinds of networks and evolve ones that have this modular structure that protect these minority ideas? Another famous model is Barabasi's robust and weakness versus random attacks and target attacks. So small world, like power law structured networks have weakness against target attacks. You hit the hubs, then it disconnects the network. And random networks don't have that, but if you've got like random attacks, then you can disconnect random networks. Okay, so what about the optimal network? What's the optimally weak network to targeted attacks? What's the optimally robust network to random attacks? What's the optimal network that is both robust to random and target attacks? That might be a network no one's ever seen before. That might be a structure that's super important that we didn't know to look for it, and it might be everywhere. So we want to evolve that network, measure it, and then look for it in actual networks that we see. All right, conflicting propagations. This is something where we want to see more interesting, never seen before, cool network structures, complex networks, where we've got, say, like 3 or so spreading diseases that are spreading, and 3 or 4 like ideas that are spreading. And we want to simultaneously stop the disease from spreading as much as possible, or slow it down, while getting the idea to spread as much as possible. And what kind of network structures are capable of doing that? All right, so that should be cool without the GA, but especially with the network GA, I think it's going to be exciting. So we're looking for more ideas to steal. So hopefully you have them. And if you have those, please send them in the Slack channel. It's going to be, say, easier to maintain. You can make a new channel or send me an email. That's also very easy. And now it's open for questions and comments.
Yeah, thank you for that, Aaron. Great talk for sure. And so let me pull up the participants list so I have that available. If anyone has a question or comment for Aaron, I see we have one hand raised already. I have one comment I'd make, Aaron. I'm just curious, have you tried, before you give up completely on NetLogo, have you tried increasing the heap space? There's a command line argument you can do to do that.
Command line?
Yeah.
What year is this? Command line?
Anyways, I'll drop a link to the fix in the chat, just so you can at least try some different before you give up completely. But I'll pass it over to Josh for his question.
I put that comment in there just for you, actually.
Yeah, no, I think this is great, Aaron and Patrick. What wonderful line of work with lots of applications. I mean, I'm sure you've thought of it. I think you even mentioned it in passing, Aaron, that, you know, another tack would be to start with the fully connected network and ask, what is the optimal way to prune that? Like, that would be the optimal strategy for social distancing, for example. Instead of saying, what's the network that maximizes propagation? The dual problem, of course, is what's the best way to disconnect the network, you know, in order to have the thing die out, right? I mean, you could have herd immunity through network structure, and that would be an interesting angle as well. And especially in connection with this competing contagions, as it were. I mean, we should talk further, because Erez and I and others are studying precisely this question, is that there's a propagating disease, but they're also propagating opinions about the disease, fears about the disease, and they interact with one another to affect the dynamics, and whether multiple waves, what have you. Anyway, I think it goes in a million directions, and it's terrific stuff, and I look forward to talking to you more about it. So congratulations. Right. It's really fun and awesome.
So actually, on that note, I had a general comment to make that I was supposed to make at the beginning, but I forgot, is that as someone who lives on the other side of the globe, I'm really happy about virtual conferences. This is the silver lining for me of this pandemic, is that I've been able to attend conferences in places I would never be able to visit practically. And in the future, when you are able to, I know there's lots of advantages to a live conference, and you, of course, should do that as soon as you can. But if you maintain this like hybrid option, then I can continue participating in the future. And I would greatly appreciate that.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay, there's a bunch of stuff on chat which I can't see unless I stop sharing my screen. So
I've been taking care of it.
Oh, okay.
I've been taking care of it, Aaron.
Excellent.
So Rob, I saw your hand go up first. What's your question?
Yeah, so Aaron, very nice results. Now in the model specification, you told us right at the start that you're using a very specific updating routine, right? Which is in essence kind of a parallel synchronous one, which might be useful for a natural science type process. Unclear whether that's the right updating for a social process, right? In general, since you raised a general question at the end. So it'd be nice to know the extent to which any of the results are robust to significant modifications of the agent updating. And my sense, by the way, just from from having supervised dissertations on this area, et cetera, is that usually the results are highly sensitive to the agent updating scheme. Just so comment.
Can I take that? Can I take that, Aaron?
If you must, go ahead.
Yes, absolutely. And despite the epidemiological proof of concept application here, this actually arose from something very different, which was indeed social. In fact, a tradition of social epistemology and philosophy of science, where the general question is, what kind of network of communication between what kind of epistemic agents can result in a timely convergence on the most accurate exploratory result. And that's really where we started off heading, but it was, okay, given the general strategy of treating the network matrix as your genome, what can we start with that's going to be easier than that? And we couldn't think of anything easier than this very simple epidemiological. But yes, the goal in the end is these more social contexts. And yes, that is going to be a very different dynamic.
Right. So yeah, just found a comment in the social context. The parallel synchronous one is famously productive of computational artifacts. Right. This is the old Noack and May paper that Huberman and Glantz criticized long ago. Right. So just FYI for those people who don't know that literature so well, I guess.
No, yeah, we're not endorsing this SI model as realistic or even useful. Actually, we are doing it as a proof of concept only. Yeah, and we are interested if we had a more sophisticated model. In fact, borrowing models, like published models, like others do, and then testing them on this framework and seeing. Like not just this network or this network, but we can explore the whole space of networks in between. This kind of is probably our next step, conservative step.
Yeah, I might interject just quickly with moderator's privilege. Aaron had mentioned that there's like 4 classes of information diffusion models out there that are well studied. I'm happy to follow up with you and kind of point you in the direction on those various literatures. From the independent cascade model to Granovetter's linear threshold model, right, to all these different aspects. So
yeah, some of the ones Aaron mentioned, some of the ones that are in this philosophy of science tradition, and that tradition is one in which the Zollman work is maybe foundational, although it is based on some work in economics. But the idea is what kind of network is going to be best at achieving a correct result in some kind of exploration. And Zollman did it with which of 2 one-armed bandits is giving the better payoff. I and Aaron and some other people have done it in terms of exploring a landscape that's more like a Hong Page landscape. We've been considering diversity in juries as the same kind of same kind of thing. And the headline result from that tradition is, oh, look, ring networks find more accurate results, although they take longer time to convergence than fully connected networks. But all of those studies have been done with, let's consider these 5 networks, rings and hubs, and the idea of doing a genetic algorithm on the genome of the matrix is maybe those aren't all of them, or maybe there are particular features of networks that are doing the work.
Yeah. I do want to make sure we get one last question. Graham had a question. Graham, are you there?
You're muted to Graham.
Josh still has his hand up as well. I don't know.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean. I just.
Okay, all right. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't jumping.
I just assumed that everyone's taking their hand. That it forgets to take their hand.
I'm sorry. I forgot. My apologies.
Two quick thoughts. I love this. Two quick thoughts. One, it seems like you want some way to measure how close the networks you have evolved are to the standard set of networks. Like, so, how close is what you've evolved to a preferential attachment network? How close is what you've evolved to a small world network? Because if it turns out early on in the research process that this thing is evolving a set of networks that are quite familiar, one, that might argue for redirecting the research elsewhere because the evolutionary model is just finding things that, we already know. Probably that won't happen, but it seems like you need some sort of distance between networks measure in here to think about that. Are you evolving unique solutions, or are you evolving things that are categorically familiar?
Certainly, yes.
Maybe you've already done that.
I've not done that here,
You're,
but I have done
Aaron,
that.
you're probably staring at a lot of these networks. Do they look like preferential attachment networks, or do they look like small world networks?
With the SI model, they don't look like anything in particular. The ones that are just removing edges just get sparser and sparser and sparser, and they just like leftover spaghetti. And then the other one, it looks like a full meal of spaghetti, because they just get more and more edges, and it's just denser and denser with no particular structure that matters. Just more is better. But yeah, anyway, there are already various means of comparing networks, similarity. So we could use like a network motif. So what are those called? It's graphlet comparison technique, where we look at substructures of the graphs and compare them. And of course, just comparing the broad stroke standard measures that like Network X package would have built into it, and just comparing them across it.
And then the other thought that I had was, so right now what you're doing is you are evolving the network, then letting the spread happen. And I wonder if there's another line of research here where you're allowing the evolution to happen in time with the spread.
Yeah. So this is a dynamic network models, and these do exist. There's a lot of those. I think that's partly something like Rob was talking about, right? It's another thing that makes it more realistic, in the sense that when people get sick, right, they don't act the same behaviors, right? They change. When they see sick people, they behave. So the probability of transmission changes when their state changes. So there's a lot of models that are like that, but yeah, that's not sort of our goal. It's given a network and spread on this network. What's the shape of the network that would do that? Now, we could combine them, right? Where we're evolving the initial network, and in a particular trial, the network could be dynamic, but we're evolving the category of initial networks.
So I think we'll have to move on to the next presentation, but thank you again very much, Aaron, for that
great
talk. That was fantastic. So next up we have, sorry, pulling the schedule up. We have